Hey, how are you? Sorry.
So it's
I like it. I like it. I thought it read really well, and I could read through and digest it. If it wasn't my area of interest. Yeah.
I didn't want to send it out before, we get some,
But I presented this
in a conference. 45 seconds.
One committee is the paper one that was awarded.
Very exciting.
That's the paper represented if you won that award.
I've been asking everybody lately, when I get the chance to moderate, they're really nervous, actually.
Yeah,
I told
being in the middle of the journey.
Have to be, like shooting this
I'm really nervous, I'm going to go on the web.
Oh, no, you see an email that I sent you?
I would apply.
She was asking for a specific topic.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Could someone grab the door, please? We're ready to start. It's noon. We're happy to have no introduction. Claudia Avellaneda from O'Neill/SPIA, O'Neill-SPIA, and she has 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have questions. So thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Dean, for the moderating, and thank you, everyone, for coming at this rainy day. I should have brought lunch to compensate you for your time. And this is a paper that is co-authored with my PhD student, Ricardo Andres Bello Gomez, who just got a wonderful job, so let's congratulate him. So I am Colombian, he's Colombian, so this paper is about Colombian mayors. So anyway, so this is the title of a paper, and as you probably know, I do experimental analysis with political elites, mainly in Latin America, in addition to other type of research. So what is the motivation of our research? Given the adoption of decentralization in Latin America, there is this normative push for providing more autonomy to local governments. The notion is that along with this local autonomy, the local chief executives demand also more autonomy to perform, to formulate programs, and to deliver these services. Indeed, most of the literature recognizes that chief executives actually dislike to relinquish autonomy. And even that is the case with only they need to cooperate or they need to share, they feel that they're actually ceding some of the jurisdictional autonomy. So our question here, or what we wonder is, when facing external shocks, do we still see that the chief executive continue demanding autonomy? Or do we believe that actually there are some decision contextual features that are going to moderate chief executives' preferences for delegation or for autonomy? So given this motivation, our research question is the following. When and under what circumstances do chief executives opt for delegated decision autonomy? So in order to answer this question, we are deviating quite a lot from the existing literature. Most of the existing literature relies on the principal agent model in order to explain delegation. However, according to this model, in order to use the principal agent model, principals need to have the power to grant and to revoke autonomy. And not always that is the case. It might be just a single delegation. So that's why we deviate from that, and we are just using this framework in order to explain decisions to delegate. This is the credit claiming and blame avoidance framework. According to this framework, the notion is that the politicians assess the risk of suffering exposed blame cost. What are those possible costs? Protest, non-reelection, impeachment. So according to the framework, there is more salience and blame avoidance than credit claimant. So the expectation would be, I always prefer to credit more claim, but in this case, there is more salience in terms of blame avoidance. And however, we say that there are many claiming opportunities for politicians, because by doing that, they might actually obtain political, professional, and personal gains, such as reputation, re-election, or promotion. So here we argue that when considering delegation, chief executives contemplate their perceived opportunities for exposed credit claimant against their perceived risk of suffering exposed blame cost. In calculating this trade-off, so they are gonna say, I'm gonna claim credit or I'm gonna avoid the blaming cost, we argue that contextual decision features act as levers to shift the balance between perceived credit claiming opportunities and blame cost. Particularly, we are looking into three specific contextual decision levers: visibility of the decision issue, salience of potential beneficiaries by the decision, and the location of the point in the stage in the policymaking process. So these are the three decision contexts that we are considering here that we believe that they are going to affect chief executives' decision to delegate or not. So let's start with the first one, project visibility. According to the existing literature, visibility is a dimension of salience. Visible issues are more likely to become salient, therefore, they are more likely to gain attention in agenda setting. In addition to that, visible, tangible issues are more likely to be more visible for citizens. Therefore, politicians are more likely to claim credit on those issues because they know that they are more visible for their constituencies. So given these rationales, our first hypothesis states the following. Chief executives are more likely to delegate managerial autonomy to other levels of governments with confronting less visible issues. The next contextual decisions that we are looking into is the salience of beneficiaries. So here we rely on these literatures that suggest that emphasizing the salience of a particular social identity actually can influence performance, perceptions, and behavior. Particularly, Forehand et al. Suggests the following, that when we process identity-relevant information that tends to be more pronounced, it tends to be more salient or more pronounced when it is pertinent. Social identity is an activated component of the individual's self-schema. So when this activation occurs, it means that actually there is identity salience. It means the individual becomes more sensitive to identity-relevant stimuli. So given that, our second hypothesis suggests that chief executives are more likely to delegate managerial autonomy to other levels of government for projects serving populations less salient to their constituencies. The next contextual factor that we are looking into is the phase or the stage in the policy process. As we know, politicians or chief executives have to make decisions across all the policy-making process, identifying the problem, setting the agenda, formulating solutions, then adopting a solution, then implementing, and then evaluating. So we believe that the possibilities of claiming credit across this policy-making process are going to be different. And the notion here is when we contrast formulation and implementation, here chief executives are expected to perceive greater claiming in the implementation phase because this is the materializing phase. In addition to that, what gets formulated is not necessarily what gets implemented. So given that, our last hypothesis suggests that chief executives are more likely to delegate managerial autonomy to other levels of government for policy or project formulation, but not for implementation. So these are our three hypotheses. Now the question is where to test them. So, we decided to do this in the case of Colombian municipalities, and probably here I need to give you a background on what is the context of Latin America in order to conduct this. So we wanted to interview local executives in Latin America. So the way that we operate is we have contacts in most of the countries, And usually they call me, they email me, and they say, Claudia, all the mayors of this country are gonna get together in this national convention, and immediately we pack in 2 days. So usually we have to set up the survey experiment in a very fast time because we have to submit this to IRB approval of the institution. So sometimes while we are on the plane, we are just putting together all the surveys and try to get things done because unfortunately we tend not to plan in Latin America. So conferences usually are planned 1 month in advance or sometimes 2 weeks in advance. So Colombia is a decentralized country since 1991. It was unitary before without decentralization. It is made up of 32 departamentos. We don't want to call them departments, but departamentos, which is the same as provinces, and 1,100 municipalities. The chief executive at the local level is the mayor and has political and administrative responsibilities. It is elected for a 4-year term with not immediate re-election. They have to stay out for 1 period and again to be re-elected if they want so. But they play a key role in delivering social service, and actually they have so much power that now everyone wants to run for mayors because they really have a lot of power. Now, also, we need to provide you some background about Venezuela with Colombia because the experiment was designed based in this context. So as you can see here, Colombia and Venezuela share a lot of border area. So it is about 13,000 miles, 1,300 miles that they share. So Ricardo is actually, Ricardo, what is your town here?
More to the east.
More to the east is here.
Okay.
And my town is exactly on the border with Venezuela, 5 minutes away from the border. So given that, we knew already about what's happening with all the migrants from Venezuela. So Colombia has hosted so far more than 1.5 million Venezuelan migrants. And even those who are not there, they use Colombia to go to the other South American countries. So actually it is about 4 or 5% of Colombian population. Migration is a salient social policy issue for national and local governments. So here is just a little picture that illustrates you the problem of migration from Venezuela to the other Latin American countries. So this is in thousands. So Colombia has so far about 1.5 million migrants. The next country is Peru with 861,000 migrants. The next one is Mexico, then Chile, Argentina, and the Caribbean islands, and Costa Rica, about 29,000 people. So the migration is all over Latin America, but mainly to Colombia because this is the area that has the largest border area. And so given this context, we took advantage of this convention, National Mayors Convention that was going to take place in Cartagena, beautiful Cartagena, Colombia. So it was last year from the 5th to 8th of March, and 1,100 mayors were supposed to be there, except the mayors of the main capitals of provinces, because these are considered larger towns, so they belong to a different association. So if we exclude the 32 capitals, so it will be about 1,075 municipalities supposed to be there. Only 488 attended the conference, and from this, we were able to survey 250 mayors in 2 days. So it was quite a marathonic job. So the way what we do it is, since we get up, we start surveying mayors. So they attended this conference. We asked permission to be allowed to be within the conference. We asked permission to stay in the same hotel where the conference takes place. In the morning, when I go to get my hair done, all the female mayors are there. So I take the survey with me and I said, Mr. Mayors, could you please start filling out this survey? So we take advantage of every single minute. We go to the talks where they are attending. The president of the country was there, all the cabinets and the vice president. During the breaks, we just approach them and we tend to convince them by saying, we heard that you are the most wonderful mayor. We want to know what you are doing. Could you please answer this 5-minute survey? And that is the way that they answered the survey. So it was, for them this time, it was the last year of their administration. That administration starts in 1st of January and it goes to 31st of December. So it is good for all the indicators because it is exactly with the academic year and they were attended, these mayors were the last year of that administration. So this is the particular vignette that we provide to them. Remember that we are manipulating two particular variables here. One is the salience of the issue, and the other one is the salience of the beneficiary, the visibility of the issue and the salience of the beneficiary. So it was like this. Suppose that in your municipality, Venezuelan migrants are approximately 10% of the total population. We didn't specify a number because it might be different for a small municipality compared to a large municipality. The vast majority of the migrant population has Colombian relatives in your municipalities. This is the first manipulation. For some of them, we told that those migrants had relatives. And this is extremely important because 30 years ago, the situation was the opposite. Colombians wanted to go to Venezuela because of the economic crisis in Colombia. So nowadays, all these Colombians who went now are coming back. So that's why in the municipalities, these migrants have relatives. You see, my cousin returned, my uncle returns, the cousin of my cousin is here. So that is the connectivity, but you need to know the context in order to do that. So for some, we told them that these migrants have relatives, and for others, they didn't have relatives. The national government offers resources to implement vaccination and preventive health campaigns. I contacted some mayors in advance asking, what is going on with now of these migrants? They say, no, we need to provide vaccination campaigns. So these are real things that actually take place. For others, we didn't provide the vaccination campaigns. For others, we told that they needed to construct classrooms in order to provide education for these new migrants. So this is the way that we operationalize visibility of the issue, vaccination versus classrooms. To access these resources, a project must be presented to the approved by the Ministry of Health in the case of vaccinations, or in the case of classrooms by the Ministry of Health, Education. The ministry will monitor the results every month for a whole year. Given the context, who would we prefer to do the project formulation? And we gave these choices: the municipal government, the departmental government, the Ministry of Health, in this case is the national government, or any other agency. And the same questions apply for implementation. So in this way, we have already the 6 possible choices: 2 for visibility of the issue, 2 for salience of the beneficiary, and 2 for the phases in the policy-making process, okay? So here are exactly the way that we manipulated visibility. For those that are less visible issues, vaccination, and more visible, constructions of classrooms and distribution of school kits. They are more visible, they tend to be more tangible. Salience of beneficiary, migrants have local relatives, and no salient, migrants have no relatives in the municipality. Now, because we have only approached 250 mayors, from which we had to exclude 11 surveys because they didn't complete entirely all the questions. So we needed to compare whether the municipalities that we included in our study actually are a reflection of the rest of municipalities that we didn't include in our study. So this is just a characteristics of included versus not included municipalities in terms of population, revenue, rural population, linear distance to the department, and linear distance to Bogota, which is the capital. So we see that the mean value between these two groups, we ran just the test, this is not statistically significant. So it means that the samples that we included in the survey experiment is actually not statistically different from the municipalities that were not included. Also, we did a balancing test because according to in experimental analysis, the treatments must be homogeneous. The groups must be homogeneous across the different treatments. So in this case, we did the balancing test for when we have the two groups of people by project type. For those mayors that we give that it was vaccination and for those that it was classrooms. So we compare them across different variables because in addition to the experiment, after the experiment, we had 15 questions in which we asked the mayor, of course, how many years they have been in office, whether they have previous local experience or experience at the national level, how many city council mayors, city council were part of their political party. We ask for other questions. So based on that, we are doing the balancing test. So according to this, there is only one variable that shows that this is statistically significant between the two groups, the linear distance to the departmental capital, but this is the only one. And the other variables, actually, they are similar, okay? And then we did the balancing test based on the other manipulation, that is the salience of the beneficiary, whether they have local relatives or whether they do not have local relatives. Again, in this case, we did the balancing test and we see that the means between the two groups, no one of them is statistically significant, different from the other one. So now that we know that the treatments are homogeneous, that they actually are balanced, so let's present the first results. So here we have the results for, first of all, for project formulation and then for project implementation. When they have local relatives and the program is classrooms, or when they have local relatives and the program is vaccines. And here, when they do not have local relatives. So in general, as you can see, that mayors prefer not to delegate. That is the big result here. So they prefer to retain autonomy and the municipality. Now, as you can see, they are less likely to delegate autonomy to the departamento. They prefer to delegate autonomy to the national government, but not to the departamento. And there were only few cases in which they were willing to delegate to an agency, not at the subnational level, not the national level. These were particular NGOs that were operated in their municipalities, okay? And in terms of formulation and implementation, we can see some difference. So in implementation, there are more mayors likely to say that they prefer not to delegate compared to formulation. You see, 168 mayors. But in general, in implementation, also the same pattern. They prefer not to delegate to departmental and they're less likely to delegate to the national level. This is just the big picture without doing other analysis, just based on the 2x2 matrix that is according to the treatments. So now, here we combine formulation and implementation to see the bigger picture. So we see that 112 mayors are more likely to say, I prefer not to delegate, neither for formulation nor for implementation. And in total, we have actually 139 here mayors that say only at the municipal level. So we see the same pattern. Now, we run a multinomial logic regression because we have several choices: national, departmental, municipal, or other, yeah? So here the base category is municipalities. And let's see what are the results based on the treatment. So with the project type is more visible, that is classrooms. In project formulation, nothing is significant. It means that in the formulation phase or stage of the policy-making process, there is no difference in mayoral preferences. Neither when they have, the migrants have local relatives in the municipality. However, in project implementation, so we see that actually compared to the municipality that is the base category, mayors are less likely to delegate autonomy to the national government. Less likely compared to the municipality, but only for implementation.
You are a little past 15 minutes. Are you getting close to the end?
Okay, sure. So let's look at the extreme scenarios. We are gonna look now only those that set municipality for both things, implementation and formulation, and those cases that say national government for both things, and compare those cases against the other thing to see we see the same pattern. So these are the two cases. So now we run just a simple Ols regression because this is compared municipality against everything or national government against everything to see we see the same patterns. And again, as you can see here, I'm sorry, so they are more likely to delegate, to not to delegate or to retain autonomy to the municipality, because here is that the case for when the project is classrooms. But however, with the migrants have local relatives, it's not significant in this case. Now, if we use Ols regression just for national delegation, again here, we see that they are less likely to delegate to the national government for project implementation when the issue is a classroom that is more visible. However, here we see for the first time that if we combine both formulation and implementation, in those cases, mayors are less likely to delegate when they have migrants and the migrants have local relatives in the municipality. So we see just in those cases when we combine the two cases. Now, we split the sample by population. We split the sample by population because most of the municipalities tend to be small municipalities between 5,000 and 10,000 people. So we divided the sample by lower than 20,000, and here we find the wonderful surprise that actually in smaller municipalities, mayors are less likely to delegate for formulation or implementation when they have, the migrants have local relatives. And it makes sense because these mayors in the small municipalities know everyone, so they know who is relative of whom, and they say, no, I prefer just to benefit these people, okay? And so here
30
are
seconds.
I did, come on.
We're 25 minutes
Okay.
in, actually, so we need to just wrap it up, and then we can get the questions.
And we did the regression analysis, including all the covariates that we asked mayors during the survey to see we see the same pattern. And again, we see here that they are less likely to delegate when the issue is a classroom, and the only other variable that becomes significant is females. So anyway, that is our beautiful project. I hope that I gave you a good idea what it involves.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take the cue, so raise your hand if you are. So I've got Mike, I've got somebody. I'll keep your hand up for a moment if you would. So I have one first starting question. What happens when you bump into people who realize you told every mayor that they're the greatest mayor? Yeah, how does that work out?
I am very strategic. I know
Hope they don't
that
talk to
they
you.
are special.
All right, Mike is first.
Yeah, Claudia, this is actually a very well-designed project. So obviously you were thinking about it before those 2 days of warning that you had. And I think the analysis is all on the way you designed the experiment is really nice. But I want to ask you a little bit about your interpretation of it, particularly of this visibility distinction you're making between building schools and vaccinations. And you talk about this a little bit in your discussion on page 9 when you're setting this up. So you triggered something in me there in that discussion that sort of was kind of percolating already anyway. It's a little easier to get bribes from construction workers than it is from nurses giving vaccinations, okay? So is an alternative word for visibility here, you know, a higher rent potential, higher bribe potential, you know, sort of a higher personal kind of interest for the mayors? And wouldn't that give you something a little different? So you'd have one measure that's really more about personal interest of the mayor, and then your other measure would be very much about the salience to the population as a whole, because the bribes aren't something the population is going to be that interested in, but the mayor might be. Okay. So how would that change your analysis if you think of that variable more, measuring more in terms the bribe-seeking mayors versus the non-bribe-seeking mayors?
Very good comment, Mike, and we have been struggling about how to label this variable. We started by calling it tangibility of the issue tangibility. we presented the paper and someone told us, this is not tangibility, this is visibility. So we switched to visibility. And, but actually in the paper, we describe some literature from Mauro that says that actually is that the issue is more likely to benefit personally through bribes. That would be, so we can use that, but we needed to find just what would be the right word to describe that more, I don't know, sick prone, I don't know, I need to think about it. But
We had
it's a
sticky
good
words.
point.
We
Yeah,
had sticky words.
yeah, probably. Thank you, Mike.
Sally?
Yes, so my question is, which department is assigned responsibility for vaccination? You know, is it the Ministry of Health? Is it the municipality? Do municipalities have any formal role in vaccination versus building classroom? So,
Ricardo is.
yes, of course.
So,
Thank
thank you for the question. So it depends on the type of municipality. The biggest municipalities are responsible for the provision of both education and health, but those are the municipalities that were not attending this context. So for the municipalities that are part of our sample, they usually, they are used to collaborate with the intermediate level of government that has the main responsibility for both the provision of education and the administration of the public health system, right? So that was also, let's say, good for our setting because they are supposed to be used to interacting with the departmental level. What was very surprising for us, however, is that most of the municipalities didn't care about the intermediate level of government. They either decided to take the project in their hands or delegate it to the national government, bypassing the one level that in reality has the biggest role.
Thank you, Sally.
Carrie?
I guess I'm not quite clear about the institutional context. So you keep using this terminology, you know, like mayors are statistically and significantly less likely to delegate project implementation autonomy to the national government. And my question is, do mayors have the authority to delegate decision-making to the national government, or does it more like work the other way around? And who has the authority to do what? And so is the context really that you're saying, if they had a choice between a project that was managed by the national government versus one they could do themselves, they would choose to do the one they could do themselves. So I'm not quite clear whether you're distinguishing the psychological frame they have about what they would desire versus what they actually are entitled to do.
Very good point, Kerry, because we tend to design things that in real life actually are real, yeah? That this is the normal circumstances that they have. Well, they might delegate to association of municipalities in order to gain benefits of scale, the economies of scale. In this case, the way that we suggested is assume what they will do, assuming that they will have the opportunity to take it or to leave it or to reassign it, that would be the case. It might be the case that not always they are going to have the opportunity to say, we are not going to do it, we prefer you to do it. They don't have it because usually they are imposed things to
It would
do.
be helpful in your paper to make that very clear,
Okay,
because it sounds as if they're choosing whether to do it themselves or to delegate it to the national government, and that seems kind of strange.
very good point. Thank you, Kerry.
Gustavo. And then we have an open queue, so please sign up.
So my question, I think, is directly related to Kerry's point. It's my idea of the decentralization literature was always that this is coming from the national government to the provinces or to the municipalities, rather the other way around. No? So it's I was also missing more context on this. No? Another way of thinking is that what you are doing is to try to get the revealed preferences of what the majors will do if they have the chance. And then essentially, that doesn't tell you the whole picture, because the whole picture must include what the national government wants to. So it's like the delegation process is always the thing. It's somebody delegating and somebody having at least incentives to do it. No. So in this case, you are trying to get the reveal preferences of essentially the majors if they have the chance to choose, but maybe they don't have it. So that's one thing. So the second thing is connecting with this idea that they never choose the departamentos. What is the firing power of departamentos in terms of resources? Because my feeling is in Colombia, it's either the national government or the municipalities, and then the departamentos are there, nobody knows exactly what they do. So essentially, these guys as well, the departamentos is nothing. So essentially, if I'm going to delegate, I'm going to delegate at least with somebody that has firing power, no, to do something. But then again, maybe I have a mixed, a wrong idea of what's the role of departamentos in Colombia.
Do you want?
Well, that's exactly what we note in the conclusions, and it was a discussion that we had very recently about, well, what can we make of this not choosing the departamentos? And I think it reflects exactly your point. There is a mismatch between the responsibilities and the capacity of these intermediate governments to actually provide services. And given with the choice, mayors definitely are going to jump towards the level that actually has the capacity to help them.
One related thing is like, I think it would be very interesting to put an extra, maybe for future work, in which you offer the majors the resources, but they will do it, versus the option of, oh, I have to go and tax my community to do it, because those are very different things, no?
Okay.
It may be not clear here, is I do it or not, but who is going to put the money?
Okay, so here it was not specified, yeah, that is true. And related to the point with preferences for departamentos or the governors, some governors have certain resources that usually they share with the mayors that belong to the same political party.
Oh, okay.
So that's why most of the analysis I control for the party alignment between mayors and governors. And here, when we included the co-barriers, we include the vote share for gubernatorial women. Because if the governor knows that this municipality is providing a lot of votes for him or for his party, more likely to provide more resources.
Nice.
We have a queue, Billy. I'm going to take the chance to ask a question, also give a comment. I don't think you really have an experiment here. What you have is a contingent evaluation study where you're asking people there to reveal their preferences. And you kind of portray it as you've got the experimental evidence, but that's not what you have. And I think that would be clarifying. I was kind of confused until I kind of got into it. And the second thing, and I think it links to Carrie and Gustavo's question a bit, is I would have liked to have seen some information on the actual delegation of various duties from municipalities, just from data, you know, what things do municipalities do? Are they doing vaccinations or not? Just regular data, and I understand the identification problem, just to give a sense of what they're doing now, give a little context to, you know, what your questionnaire, how it fit with actual duties. So those are the two comments, I guess.
Excellent, very good points, Tim. Yeah, we need to reinforce that to see if actually that is the case, that they are delegated. The cases that I have seen that there is delegation is to Association of Municipalities because of economies of scale.
Yeah, so we're back, Q, Carrie, Mike, then Tony.
Is it my turn?
Yeah, Carrie first. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's just extensions of these comments, and I'm not sure if it's adding anything that hasn't been said, but I was just wondering about the fiscal picture, because I think we've talked about this before, Chile has a very centralized fiscal administration, so localities have to ask the federal government to do anything. From what you responded to them, it sounds like Colombia has a bit more decentralized fiscal. So in the normal course of things, you know, for the construction, would that be something that would tend to be financed by the national government or local? And also, I would assume the vaccinations would be probably a more nationally financed thing. So just the financing administrative picture might influence which they would prefer. prefer, be done by the national government than be done locally.
Yeah, that we didn't actually mention anything, about who is going to finance that
In the experiment.
in the
no,
experiment,
yet.
yeah, that is.
Well, we did mention that the national government is going to provide services. What we didn't prime was, remember that the current
Yes.
structure is this or that, right?
Exactly.
In both cases, both in terms of the service provision, in both areas, as I mentioned, the main responsibility is for the departamentos through transfers from the central government, right? But the operators are mostly the departamentos. When municipalities are tiny and don't have that responsibility, want to build a classroom, for instance, or do something like a huge vaccination campaign and they don't have the resources, they have to partner with the departamentos using those resources. But the trigger for the approval would be at that intermediate level, in both cases. Mike?
Yeah, let me give you another example of something you raised in the discussion that didn't really come up later, and it triggered me to go down a little rabbit hole or something away from where you want to take me. And that was what happens to these mayors after their term ends. Okay? And it seems to me that's going to be in their minds, and I didn't realize from reading the paper that they were this close to the end of their term in this sort of thing. And so that might have sort of been prompting a little bit. But the way I read what you described, sort of their careers, that if a local mayor is ambitious and wants to move to be more of a political leader, he or she can't stay as mayor of that community, right? And now apparently he can come back later, but he would need to go to the department level or the national level sort of now. So it would seem to me that part of the calculation for a mayor thinking about these resources that are coming to him because these refugees are coming in and there's this national level part of what his or her calculation might be is, how do I take advantage of this in order to further my own career? Okay, so it's a little more politically relevant kind of self-motivation rather than the bribes. But I mean, it is for an ambitious sort of leader. So, and you say you ask a lot of questions of the mayors. Is there anything in your data set that would help you distinguish mayors who might be ambitious versus ones who are not?
Very good question.
Sometimes I
To
ask,
do kind of tests on that.
sometimes I ask them what is their immediate political ambitions. But sometimes
Oh, you did?
but not at this time, but sometimes what they do, if I go to their offices, they say, close the door and I will tell you, because they don't want the others to hear. But this time we didn't ask that.
Well, we have when we have asked that kind of question in a similar setting, like a national convention or something, they're not going. But what we have noticed that they don't reveal very.
Exactly.
They're not comfortable with the question. Like, well, we'll see.
That I understand.
So it has been difficult to actually.
But it seems to me you might have kind of a biased sample in favor of the more ambitious ones, because why are they going to this convention? Said about half of them are going to the convention.
That might affect the external validity, but not the internal validity.
I agree.
Because
But
there is no reason to believe that we have a difference in the share of ambitious mayors between the treatments, right?
I don't know. I mean, it would seem to me that this going this late in their term shows an interest in networking with other politicians in other communities, and that suggests maybe, an ambitious person more than someone that wants to go back to their.
But my point is, which makes the case for maybe the ones that didn't go are slightly different, well taken, but there is no reason to believe that between our different treatments.
Within your sample, I understand exactly. It's an external versus internal validity kind of question. But, and I also appreciate how difficult it is to ask that kind of a question. But, I mean, even youth, I mean, even the younger mayors might be more ambitious than the older mayors. We have a good example of that sort of in the presidential campaign. That might be sort of a proxy.
Now, if I may, there is also another caveat here in the ambition question, and is in some cases we have to develop a little more this discussion in the paper, but we mentioned it. In some cases, there is not even their own career, but their families, right? So even for older mayors that have been mayors a couple of times, and they're about to retire, but they're thinking of how to
Get their brother.
support their brothers or one of their sons or something like that. So that makes it even more difficult if you ask them, what is your next step? And they're like, well, retirement, but my son is going to run for governor, right?
Now, what we did ask them, because we wanted to make sure that actually the topic or the issue was relevant to them, is how many actual Venezuelan migrants they have in their municipalities. So we asked them, and we thought, maybe there are municipalities that they have none. Tell me, no one. Yes, Ricardo.
Yeah, no one says
Every
zero.
single municipalities, even municipalities from Chocó, that is on the extreme side of Colombia, they have. And what was funny was that certain mayors told me, I got many, but you know what I do? I bus them to the next city. So I hire a driver and a bus, and I send them to other town. That is the way. So this is an actual problem to every single municipality.
Tony, then back to Carrie after that.
Yeah, so a really interesting paper, and I like the collection of like in the field data. Like that's super cool. So and especially with these political elites, I think that's really fascinating. And kind of building off some of the comments, though, I mean to Mike's point, this idea of you're right. These aren't equally ambitious, but I guess does that make your findings maybe more important because you have this equally ambitious population of people that you're sampling. The treatment varies, so but if I don't know, does it make it a harder or an easier case for your findings? I guess would be a way to maybe extrapolate on the population that you're getting, right? If they're equally ambitious, and if they're all highly equally ambitious, does that ambition kind of make the two? Is it just going to make it harder or easier to find a difference between these two? That's something to think about, I guess, and kind of explore. And then the other part was, I was looking at your final tables in your analysis, tables 7, 8, 9. It looks like your standard errors aren't quite as narrow as you want them to be. So maybe back to Dean's point about having some sort of observational data in there as well to kind of triangulate some of your findings. Because right now, I was running the numbers just really quick. It does seem that bias could really, a small percentage of just kind of bias in your sample could actually invalidate your inference. So having some sort of triangulation from other data, observational data on maybe which ones actually do choose to partner or whatever, might actually strengthen your research findings a little bit. But it's really cool, but I guess I was wanting on some other areas as far as like triangulation on the methods, or maybe 230 some mayors out of 1,100 does kind of seem like, what is it about these that brings them out? And maybe you could actually use that in a way to play towards your favor and maybe strengthening the findings. But yeah, it was really cool.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Back to Carrie and then to Sully.
One thing I was thinking about when I read the paper, I guess my political economy sensibility thinks about winners and losers and distributions of gains and losses and this sort of thing. And I think maybe by construction you have, and this is not a liability, but just by construction, you've set the paper up to consider more about beneficiaries, like how salient classrooms are versus vaccinations. That's talking about how visible these are to beneficiaries. But I'm just wondering if there's something that would differ in the context about who might lose from these projects. So maybe they would all be financed by the federal national government, so folks that are paying for them are out of the jurisdiction of the locality, so those losers, the taxpayers, aren't relevant. But I'm just wondering if there might be some stakeholder, if these mayors might be thinking about who would lose as well as who would gain, and if the losers might affect their thinking in some way. I don't have a very good sense of the context to know, but...
Can I add something on this point? The losers are not in the convention. They are these districts with like a lot of populations, and they will end up paying the taxes. But maybe at the local level.
Actually, that's why they created their separated association. You know?
I'm sure.
With that argument, yeah, literally with that argument.
But I mean, it's like if there was a choice between, trade-off of projects. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like
There is
you're
an
saying
opportunity cost
they get this project or they get this project, but, often with project selections, there's quite a difference of opinion about which projects, some folks that are getting vaccinated will gain more from the vaccinations, and the folks that have kids will gain more from so if one project is chosen rather than the other, anyway, maybe losers are not relevant in this context, but I was just
But it would be a good way to probably to frame it, and another way to frame it is instead of who is gonna gain, it would be who is gonna lose. Yeah, we will have to think about it if that is possible to frame it in that way.
Well,
For
I'm
the
not
next-
suggesting you should, I was just raising the question, I think actually the way you framed it is as a experiment where it's revealing preferences for two different kinds of public goods. And that's a preference revelation about two different kinds of public goods. That's different than an actual, project context, this decision-making context. So losers may be completely irrelevant by construction. I was just wondering though.
Okay, the list is building itself, then Bernie, then Angie.
So my point is about triangulation and moving forward that Tony raised. So you described that governors are also elected and there can be partisanship overlap between governors and mayors. In that instance, maybe you could look at, are there cases where mayors can delegate the costs of vaccination to governors when there's partisanship overlap? So in regions where governors and mayors belong to the same political party, is the governor more likely to take responsibility using the state's funds to provide vaccination in the municipalities belonging to the same political party? Or do you see a similar tendency with regards to classroom management, or do you see mayors being less inclined to have governors involved in providing classrooms as opposed to providing vaccinations? So is there like a data available that you could further tap into this dynamic?
So, yeah, that's exactly one of the next steps that we want to take. It's an observational study trying to see if there is a political alignment effect on the preferences of governors in allocation of resources by municipalities. We're still gathering that data, but yes, that's exactly what we're thinking of. The other thing I want to mention about the observational data, Colombia had a national census a couple of years ago, so almost at the same time that we were doing the survey. And just a couple of weeks ago, they released the first information about multidimensional poverty indicators at the municipal level. That is going to be a way for us at least to identify the specific needs in terms of education and health in these municipalities, and then we can also contrast versus these results to start incorporating this observational data into the analysis. However, most of our results are backed in the appendix by including all the covariates that are in terms of municipal characteristics and mayoral characteristics, trying to make the results more robust, and they hold. Bernie.
So, it almost is, I was talking with Mike over here on the side, it's almost like you, rather than definitive research, you've almost got an opinion piece here. That's kind of saying, this needs a lot more work, and our opinion is, and what you'd like to do is do this same type of study, I don't care about the question now, with mayors who are in power, not polycentric, not so polycentric, more mayors top down, and do it in 5 different countries, and see if it falls in place, or are countries different. And I said mayors top down because if it's more polycentric, which it does not sound like these are, that'll be a different kind of decision process. And I'm scratching my head here, trying to help you, trying to think through this, and I just don't know if that's the answer or not, but it seems like where your end product is right at this point in time.
Yeah. We have done the same analysis with delegation in Honduras, Guatemala, and Colombia. So this is our next paper to compare whether across these three countries mayors are more likely to delegate, yes or not. If not, whether some institutional, political institutions actually. We did the same analysis in Honduras. Most of them wanted to delegate it to association of municipalities. Most of them. They didn't want to retain autonomy. And it was delegated to regional association of municipalities instead of the National Association of Municipalities. And I asked them, why are you doing that? They say, well, because of economies of scale, and second, in a regional association, still I have voice, still I know how we can decide, while in a National Association of Municipalities, in the case of Honduras, 252 municipalities, they say they don't care about what I'm going to say. So this is our next project, to compare this delegation across these three countries in which we have done the experimental analysis. And in Guatemala, it was done with, actually, there were mayors that were indigenous. So you will expect that probably then, because by nature, they would be more likely to delegate and to prefer more collaboration. So this is our next project.
Angie, finally.
So, finally, oh my God.
There's not much time.
So, yeah, no, fair enough. So I looked back through, and maybe I've missed it, but I don't see the agenda for what the National Congress of Municipalities is going to be discussing. I get a zillion invites to the National League of Cities, the National Conference of Mayors, and if they're not doing something I care about, I don't go. So my question for you is, have you got a sample that it's not surprising that certain people didn't attend because these topics weren't on the agenda? Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of like Mike's point.
I mean, yeah, I think it's been said a couple times, but so I think, but then I'm not disagreeing or agreeing. I don't know.
Yeah, no, but
Because my guess is, if this is as big an issue as you say, it is being discussed. But I would at least add in there that, hey, look, there is a natural incentive for them to have wanted to attend this because it is on the agenda.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And I don't know the answer to it, and I Googled it, and their agenda isn't public either. But if this is a big issue, which you know 1,000 times better than I do, and it looks like it is, then it's probably on the agenda, and that gives a little more weight to, hey, look, we would expect people who are interested in this topic to have been there, and therefore we surveyed those who could drop everything and come.
Okay.
But I can't even find online where the agenda is.
Yeah, but in that case, it could be the other way too, Angie,
Yes.
that only those who were interested in this particular issue will be there. So
Yes.
we will be surveying only those that care about that issue.
Yeah,
So,
it goes both ways, but
exactly.
I guess that was just a little piece of what, when I looked through, I would have wanted to see is how many times a year these type of things happen, and when else do the mayors get together, and what else was on the agenda, because we do this a lot in the U.S. These conferences of people,
So
they come together.
So definitely it's a great point that we have to be more specific about that. Makes total sense. But just to give you some context, this is the annual convention of the
Right.
organization. It's like the focal point of mayors coming together, and in sometimes like the only space that they have to talk to the national government in a broad variety of areas, right?
Sure.
So they had during the agenda meetings with half of the cabinet, including education, but also environment, but also
Sure.
the mining ministry. They had different trainings in different areas, social policy, but also the municipal finance. It was
Workshops.
very broad. And of course, migration from Venezuela was
Sure.
part of the whole
Of course.
discussion.
That's what I figured.
In particular, remember one very brave female mayor from Claudia's province.
We are very, very, very brave.
No, really, because she was like standing up to the president asking for more help to manage all this
Sure.
issue. Actually, we had that specific anecdote in one version of the paper that I think we needed
We
to.
should add it.
Yeah, we should add that
very good
definitely
point.
to highlight that those topics were among many others discussed
Sure.
in the convention. Yep.
So we have just 2 minutes. We have Mike and Gustavo. I suggest they both fire their questions out and you wrap it up after. you've heard them.
Mine's more a suggestion for thinking about future. I don't know if it's really a question you want to address. But I really like that you were making a distinction between 2 stages of the policy process, the formulation and the implementation, and sort of making an argument for why it was sort of different. What I was a little confused about is what the mayors thought you meant by that. I can imagine the formulation is sort of where's the money coming from, that this is a national program. Implementation is pretty clear, that's building the damn thing, that's why I started thinking about the construction. But what about picking where the school's gonna be put, where the classroom's gonna be put? Is the mayor gonna, I mean, it would seem to be less likely to delegate that, because he may want to, you know, help the people in some parts of the community. Because these schoolrooms are gonna be there after the refugees come back,
Yes.
you know?
That's the point of visibility.
Yeah, so,
tangibility.
you know, if that kind of falls in between that, and so it, you know, in another sort of design, you might divide the stages of the process a little bit more clearly and say, would you delegate this? Would you delegate that? Would you delegate that? Rather than, you know, implementation for, I'm not sure where it would fit. I mean, it could be formulation of the policy and sort of where it's gonna be laid, but if I'm a mayor, that's probably the biggest thing I'm concerned about, where it goes in the city.
Location.
Gustavo, can you get your question in 10 seconds?
Yeah, very, very fast. So Bernie and Mike, they were pushing more on the international comparison. I would be pushing you more in the direction of trying to figure out what other levels of government wants. It's like in different contexts. It's like, I know, Kerry was mentioned in Chile, so the president appoints the regional governors in Chile. In Argentina, there's a fiscal sharing system that organizes the relationship between provinces and municipalities and the national government. What different upper levels of government wants, it's very different. It depends on many things, and I think we really complement your research on what the major.
Okay, excellent.
Any last words?
I just want to thank you for the valuable comments. I know that the paper is gonna be much, much better thanks to all your contributions. Thank you very much. And thank
Perfect.
Would a decision, would the choice actually be